We are starting tonight with a special guest. And so tonight, Lucy McCauley is joining. If you were on the call last week, Lucy participated in our discussion, so may have heard from Lucy. And so Lucy, real quick, I'm going to keep it brief, but Lucy is a writer and has done several pieces of work, which we did include in our sign up. If you signed up for our event, you received some links, has appeared on NPR, local NPR for interviews and whatnot. Also interviewed in local newspapers. And Lucy also has an amazing story that I'm not going to share right now because we're going to get into that later this evening. But really appreciate you joining us here tonight. And also a big thanks to Jamel for connecting us with Lucy so that we could hear from you this evening. So Lucy, please expand on my very short bio, and then we'll get started with the questions that we have for you. Oh, and we'll turn your mic on.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
Yes, and did you mention coming to the table? I'm not sure if you did.
Add that, thank you.
Coming to the table, I am one of the facilitators for the national Zoom meeting that they have once a month. Coming to the table, if you don't know it, it's an organization that was founded back in 2006. It was founded by the descendants of Sally Hemings and Martha Jefferson. So it was a place where people could come and sit down at the table together in brotherhood, descendants of both of these, of enslavers and enslaved people. Just, that was the Martin Luther King vision in his I Have a Dream speech, of everyone sitting down at the table together, all the descendants. And so I'm one of the facilitators for that. I also started the first chapter in Texas. And I am a very active member of the local chapter in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where my family comes from way back. And there's so much work to be done in that town that's why I'm active there. And thank goodness for Zoom, because I can be more active now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And, so one of the links that we sent out, Lucy, was an interview you did with NPR. And in that, you noted that people shouldn't be defined only by their worst actions. And so can you expand on that and talk about why you believe that?
Well, I'm not the first person to say that, of course. Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative has said that often. And, it's something I've come to believe more, especially after I found out that my great-great-grandfather, who I thought, we'd had this whole mythology around him in my family, the family home in Wilmington, North Carolina. He had been a Princeton graduate, and he had done all these good works with the church. And anyway, I found out in 2018 that he had been one of the perpetrators of the 1898 massacre and coup d'etat in Wilmington, North Carolina. And so that was quite a shocking time and moment, and it really shook me up. And I had to do a lot of work around that, a lot of personal work. And I just came, I guess I just had to come to believe that it wasn't he isn't just the worst thing he had ever done. He also had provided a home for us for like 5 generations of our family, including mine. When we moved there into Wilmington, North Carolina, when I was in high school, we arrived bankrupt. I mean, my family was not in good shape, and it was a family home for us. And so anyway, that's kind of basically,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and as I read chapters 9 and 10, McGee kind of writes about how, particularly as individuals who identify as white, that process that you spoke about. And if you're willing to go down that road, could you just kind of maybe give us a little deeper glimpse of like just how you process through that personally? Was there organizations or other entities that helped you through that process? But would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Sure. And yeah, I really identified with that chapter, the healing, the hidden wound.
Yep.
It's like, that's it. Exactly. It's like, as white people, there's this big gaping hidden wound that we don't all talk about, of the fact that, we're on the wrong side of history. Our forebears and even many of our parents were on the wrong side of history. And I also believe that perpetrators of violence and of harm don't come out unscathed. It's in their bodies, it's in their DNA, it passes on. I mean, there's now been scientific work done on that idea of epigenetics and the inheritance of these deep wounds, if they weren't acknowledged, if they weren't dealt with, that it harms the families, and your descendants. And so my big thing is to stop it. It stops with me. It stops in my generation. My daughter knows the truth. My niece and nephew know the truth. My grandnephews, all my siblings, my cousins, not everyone accepts it now about what our great grandfather was about. But it's still there for them to learn more about if they want to.
Mm.
And yeah, just that hidden wound, that it's very important to grapple with it. And I think coming to the table, honestly, is really what helped me grapple with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And I wrote down, it stops with me. That's a challenge to myself and hopefully to everyone else, is as we hear your story and have read through McGee's book, like finally realizing like how we stop racism, it starts with us individually, and then hopefully collectively we organize to allow others to know the truth and allow them to process that. So love that. And so if you have questions for Lucy tonight, please put those into the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible within the next like 30-ish minutes here. And so the next one, and you kind of already have alluded to your great grandfather, right? Is it great or great? I can't remember.
Just one great.
Okay, one great. Yes.
Yeah.
So your great grandfather, who had a home, and so you established an endowment, and it was originally funded with McCauley's inherited portion of the sale, your portion of the sale of the family home. And your father was a perpetrator of the 1898 Wilmington massacre. And so real quick first, because I did Google it, but could you just quickly describe the 1898 Wilmington massacre so people have some historical understanding?
Sure. And, first of all, I'll say that this was something that was hidden, like many of the massacres, for a century, essentially. Or it was described as a race riot, where, the white people just had to protect themselves, kind of thing. And that's not at all. That was a total mischaracterization. And as David Zucchino entitled his book, it's called Wilmington's Lie. It was a lie. I was told that lie. Actually, I was just told nothing about it in high school. I went to high school in the 70s in Wilmington, North Carolina, and there was not one peep mentioned, and no one in my family talked about it. But anyway, it was Wilmington had become really kind of this mecca for the Black community, and whites and Blacks kind of living in community. It was like 56% African American in Wilmington in the 1890s. And, they were lawyers and doctors, and they held positions in city council. There, there was just what amounted to basically a big threat to the old white elite of Wilmington. Okay. So, and it didn't just start in Wilmington. This was all through North Carolina, where this whole campaign got going of, demonizing Black people, especially like Black men, as being this threat to white women. And we've seen that over and over again, right? In all of the instances of massacres in the United States, where it often has started, just like the triggering event, kind of the excuse really, was that some white woman's purity was being threatened somehow by a Black man. And so they were lynched. Or there was a massacre or something happened as a result of that. But this had been really brewing for at least a couple of years, where the old white established elite were trying to find a way to get the Black population out of City Hall and out, away from, stop being the majority in the town. And so, yeah, there was this whole campaign across the state. And then in Wilmington, the other thing that was really unique was there was the Daily Record, which was the only Black daily in the country at the time, as far as anyone has been able to determine. And the editor's name was Alexander Manley. And he wrote an editorial in response to just all of this slander that was happening, or libel, I guess. But anyway, I always mix those two up, but whatever the written word is of people telling lies in the newspapers, and talking about, how we had to, white women needed to be protected from the Black man. And he just wrote this really succinct, scathing editorial and published it in Wilmington, North Carolina, about how actually, many of those relationships are consensual. And historically, it's always been, the Black women who had to fear from the white man, right? The enslavers and the master who would come around. And so that was it. That was like the spark. It lit the fire. That's the excuse they were all waiting for. And there was this whole group called the Secret Nine, who had been plotting and bringing in ammunition and rifles and Gatling guns even into Wilmington. And so there was an election on November 8th. And this editorial had appeared just a couple of months before this election. And the election wasn't even a town election, actually. It was a statewide, it was at the state level. But the old white elite wanted to make sure that they got their people in, their white supremacist pals, basically. And so they had this whole campaign of, they brought in mercenaries from out of town to encircle the polls, keep the Black vote out. And they managed to do that. They managed to get their people in power. And so they won. So So that was November 8th. Then we have November 9th, and this is all 1898. The white elite realizes, okay, so we did that, but there's still all these people in City Hall who are running this city. And it was a fusionist government. It was between the populists and the Republicans, which, as we know, back then the Republicans were the good guys. And so they were holding City Hall. And so this team of Secret Nine, and they got all these mercenaries, and they all decided, we've still got to retaliate for that awful editorial. So they marched on the Daily Record offices. They burned it down. They there's pictures of it. Actually, you can find it online, because they took a picture of themselves, all these white people, outside of the burned, charred remains of the Daily Record. Fortunately, Alex Manley, the editor of that, had gotten word about it the night before, that he was going to be lynched, basically. And he had fled town. And anyone else who was left on the, and that all occurred on the 10th, okay, November 10th. That burning happened on the 10th, but they kind of got everything together on the 9th. And they had written this whole declaration, this white man's declaration, that a bunch of people signed, basically saying that white supremacy was going to rule from now on. And anyone who didn't toe that line was not welcome to stay in Wilmington. So there was a massacre that day after the burning of the record. And anywhere between, the numbers were never really confirmed, but eyewitnesses saw cartloads of bodies being dumped in the Cape Fear River, which is right there in Wilmington, North Carolina, just a few blocks from my house, my family home. And so, and then there was a coup d'etat, right? It was the only known US successful coup d'etat in US history. And they went into City Hall. They, had everybody resign, and, on fear of their lives. And, amid all of this shooting in the streets, shooting people in the back, putting a lot of people on trains, running them out of town, a lot of the African-American families had to flee to the cemetery in Wilmington and hide out there for several days. And this was November. It was cold. It was rainy. And, people got sick. And so that's the story. That's what happened. And so the result was, the next year, the count of African Americans in Wilmington, North Carolina, it had gone from 56% down to 19.
Wow.
And to this day, it remains between like 14 and 16, something like that, percent.
Wow.
So
still having.
Yeah, it was a successful coup, I mean, it did what it set out to do.
And I can only imagine the trauma in that city that still exists, without everyone knowing and accepting that truth. And I believe that's probably part of that story as to why you chose to establish the endowment. And I'm sure there's multiple steps to get you to that decision, but can you think of just one defining moment where you're like, yes, this is the direction I am going to go with, and doing so?
Yeah, it was, I guess, before, leading up to me finding out about my great grandfather, I had found out just a few years before that our family had enslaved people. That was another thing that was just never talked about. It was just kind of swept under the rug. I mean, yeah, to the point where I was, in high school in Wilmington, North Carolina, and asked to be an azalea belle which is like wearing the big hoop skirts and, sitting with an umbrella and lace gloves, the whole deal, in the gardens during the Azalea Festival in Wilmington, North Carolina, that happens every year. And just, just had no awareness whatsoever that not only was this a glorification of slavery and the plantation days, but that my family had actually been part of it. So, just going from that to then learning that we had enslaved people, I mean, on both sides of my family, my whole family tree is littered with it. We had this photograph that of one of the people who I thought had been formerly enslaved, who became a caretaker at our home. And I wanted to restore this photograph and find a descendant to give it back to. And so I went on a hunt starting to find somebody. And I ended up finding this man's name was Washington Howe. And I ended up finding one of his descendants, not his descendants, but descendant of the Howe family, named Cynthia Brown, who is just a remarkable woman who is a historian herself and a writer and lives in Wilmington. And we became very good friends and we had a lot of conversations. She joined coming to the table as well. And just over the years, both of us doing research together and apart, this idea started germinating, so that when I did find out that in fact my great-grandfather had been a perpetrator of something that her ancestors had to flee from and had to hide out in the cemetery. I mean, the story from her great-grandmother was hiding out in the cemetery and being afraid for their lives. And then there was this other little piece of it, which was it still kind of just gives me a chill, because the house that our family took so much pride in, the McCoy house, it's called, named after my great-grandfather, was actually built by Cynthia's great-great-great-grandfather. Alfred Howe was his name. And he was one of several brothers of Black carpenters who built a lot of Wilmington and, just had a hand in so much of it, and never really credited with it, or certainly not to the degree that they should have been. And to my parents' credit, I have to say they did, when they made the plaque, they had this historical plaque put on the house, that Alfred Howe had been the carpenter. So he's on the plaque. Mm. The other thing that's on the plaque is house is still in the family. Okay. So that's something that was, that wasn't so great my parents put in, that I just recently, it came to my attention that that's a signifier, right? That basically, I mean, the African Americans in town, not many of them could say that. This house is still in our family. It's like, we got to keep all the wealth. We got to keep everything. All of your inherited wealth went out the door, and fled town and was destroyed or burned down and, taken from them. Just, I mean, the despair. Can you just imagine, just after having built all of this, to have it all gone in one day. So it finally came to me talking with Cynthia, working with Coming to the Table, and finding out really who my great-grandfather had been, that I did not want to benefit from the inheritance of the house. I personally did not want to. And so it really made sense to set up this scholarship endowment with my portion of it. And it's an endowment in that it needs more money so that it can raise, a certain amount a larger amount every year to be given as a scholarship. And the scholarship is going to African Americans who want to study the building arts of any kind, architecture, engineering, carpentry, whatever that is. And the local AME church in town, Cynthia's church actually, is going to be helping to find those people who want to apply for it and pick them. But the whole endowment is being administered by the North Carolina Community Foundation. And I'm going to put in the link in the chat how anyone who feels like they too want to make some kind of personal reparation can donate to this fund and help grow it. Okay, so I think did I actually send it? Let's see. Okay, there it is.
Oh, there it is.
Do it online, or you can mail in something, and no amount is too small. So the whole thing, just got settled really in November. So this year, it's not going to be, we're not giving a scholarship this year, but next in spring of 2023 is when the first scholarship will be issued, and we're hoping it will be a big one.
Awesome. And I just do we have permission to share this link in a follow-up email? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Social media, okay, as well?
Sure. Yes. Cool. And I can send you a little more about it. I have a whole write-up about how.
Perfect. We'll be in touch on that. Well, I appreciate that. And so I want to hear what questions you all have, Lucy, for Lucy, but wanted to, so some of us notes how racism takes a toll on our collective economic well-being. And then as you mentioned, and Heather mentions as well in the book, just the fact of housing, and having a house inherited from generation to generation, and whatnot. And so, there is this fear of people that they will lose something if someone else gains. And so one opposite of fear is bravery as well. And so has anyone ever came up to you and be like, wow, you are so brave? Or, when they come and they hear your story and they give you, compliments, how do you respond to that? Like, and whatnot?
That's a really good question. That it's not altruism strictly. It's about dealing with that hidden wound, right? And that's in my family, and that's passed down, and stopping it now. And I believe we're all connected, right, in the world, and that these actions, they ripple out. So it's not brave, it's not any of that. It's it's not even. Can I read something? Actually,
Absolutely.
I found a perfect description of it recently from this man named Abraham Latiner. Do you guys have anyone know about him? He writes a blog called Risk Something, and he's an activist who's focused on philanthropy and transforming philanthropy, basically. He's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but here's what he said. Instead of framing the conversation about reparations as a moral obligation to historically marginalized people, I frame reparations as everyone getting what they need to heal from white supremacy. So that's, it's about healing. It's about healing. It's about building bridges. And, in the same way that Germans, I spent some time in Germany, and I made a film about a little documentary about the legacy of the Holocaust. And I learned so much from that. I learned so much about what we should be doing in our country, and all of the restorative things that they've done. and how it was so healing. It's healing for the descendants of Germans too, and of Nazis, that these things are being done. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kaz, if you wanted to, could you pop into the chat a link to that video? We'll also send it out, but in case folks want to open that up and have access to it right away, they'll do. And then also, Lucy, could you put in the chat the name of the individual who you read that from? And then I'll try to find the blog or
Oh,
more information.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
the article, it was an excerpt from one of his blogs on Medium, I think, or something,
Okay. Yep.
called Grieving the White Void by. Okay.
All right. Oh, I found it.
Yep. Okay, good. Yeah.
We'll
So
put that in the chat too, because then that when it gets put in the chat, then boom, I can easily send that follow-up email. So well, and I because in McGee writes in chapter 10, and this is one of our discussion questions, but want to hear it from you. McGee lists out various ways as a nation we can and McGee really made that a big point as it cannot be an individual effort if we're truly going to turn the course that our nation is on right now. And so we have to do it collectively. And so as you learned from your film studying the Holocaust, and then also just your personal journey, what, like, if you could pick one thing that we're all grassroots organizers and we can do something right here in our own communities, what would you encourage us to do as a step into healing that hidden wound?
well, I guess there's a couple of things. One, just reading that chapter on, I think it was in the last chapter of the book, where Heather McGee talks about my mother. I mean, it's her mother, Gail Christopher, Dr. Gail Christopher, who is just such a remarkable woman. And I heard her for the first time at a coming to the table national gathering at East Mennonite University in Virginia back in 2016. And she was talking about truth, reconciliation, truth, healing. Oh goodness, it's truth, racial healing, and transformation. And she was very careful to talk about the idea of transformation, not reconciliation, basically, that no one wants to reconcile to what the status quo is or what it was, right? We want to transform it. And so anyway, I think, and then I learned also from reading the chapter that Dallas has a which I didn't know about. I am very, very ashamed to say, but now I do, and I'm going to be contacting them. But we have our own TRHT. So here in Dallas. And I think that is a very important step to get into every community if possible. Just this whole idea of, what they did in Rwanda, what they did in South Africa, and to some extent in Germany, of just people sitting down together from both sides of the perpetrator descendants, victim descendants, and or current victims and perpetrators, and acknowledging what happened and telling the truth, and just the kind of healing that can happen from that, from acknowledging it. And as white people, acknowledging how we benefit from it, right? How we have benefited from this white supremacist system. And of course, as we're finding out more and more, and especially reading Heather McGee's book, how it's hurt us all. It's hurt us all. and just trying to start making those changes. And then the second piece of that would be organizations like yours, which I'm so happy to find out about. I've learned so much, just reading the book and hearing you all talk last week. And then, coming to the table, check it out. Think about starting one in a chapter in your own town. There's a lot of support for doing it, and they have a lot of materials and support for it. And in Wilmington, the other thing is reparations, right? I think reparations has to happen at all levels, and personal, state, federal, by corporations, by universities who've been complicit, by organizations who've been complicit. It really needs to happen, and that's something we're really focused on in Wilmington right now. Is the reparations, and we're doing research on where it's been done everywhere in the country, how it's been accomplished, what the effect has been, and just trying to identify ways that we can make it happen in Wilmington, especially for the descendants of 1898, right? Who we now have found a bunch of them across, like Alex Manley's great grandson comes to town regularly now from California, because he's very interested in this topic and learning more about it, and just helping too with just healing that town.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And that's kind of a great segue into I know Jamel put a question in the chat along with Peg, and kind of similar in context, but Jamel asked, how do you approach individuals that you meet that might say, I don't know anyone for my past for past sins, particularly that other people committed. How do you address that?
Well, my husband my husband is one who has said that to me before, because he's an Italian. He comes, is, I don't know, second generation Italian or something. And, it's like, and he also has some German in him, but they came a long time ago. But everybody, and they're all from the Northeast, but this whole country, right? This whole country, we've all benefited from the horrors of enslavement. I think this whole country was built on it. How, even if you can't identify a particular person in your own family lineage, or, we all have benefited from it, and none of us can escape culpability from enjoying the benefits of it. And it's, yeah, it's something that I think everybody needs to acknowledge. And of course, slavery was in the Northeast as well. And some of the largest slave trader in US history was based in Rhode Island, right? The DeWolf family. So that's basically what I would say to them. And, I think what I would, next question. Keep going.
Yeah, and I think it's just as you said, just we have to tell the people the truth, and and as we share more truths, hopefully that will sink in as well. And and then Peg kind of elaborated, and you touched a little bit on it with your response to Jamel's question, but you say it stops with me. But that at the same time, as you mentioned, epigenetics. So can you just kind of talk a little more on just maybe the trials and victories you've had with family members as you try to stop that cycle?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough question, because it's so painful, right? To talk to people who are either apathetic and just don't care, don't want to look at it, um, don't want to have the blinders taken from their eyes.
Mhm.
And um,
Or
yeah,
maybe what advice would you give us as we, have those crucial conversations, but may face hesitation from dear friends and family? What advice would you give us?
um, I would say that one of the best, my guru for talking across the divide of um, people who support Trump and people who don't, um, that kind of thing. I think in all things is David Campt. Do you guys know about him? Have you heard of David Campt? He's been called the white people whisperer. Um, he is an African American man who trains white people in workshops, online, in person, through the books that he's written, and you can order. I think he's got one called the White Allyship Tool Book. Anyway, he talks about how to have those, Thanksgiving dinner conversations with people in your family who don't think like you do. And he talks about how important it is for white people to talk to other white people, really, and to not shy away from those conversations. It has to happen because he's not going to be able to access them and talk to them. That's what he always says is, look, I can't be there sitting at the dinner table with you guys. You're the ones who need to do this. And one way he always talks about is starting with the common ground that you may have, like, we all care about clean water, right? We all care about, there's certain things, healthcare, being healthy, having enough of, resources, good educational systems, and talking about those and finding your common ground so that then you can start talking about personal experiences that you've had where your mind was changed about something, and then maybe they can talk about a personal experience. And it's a whole process, and it takes a lot of training and a lot of work, but I think it's really good. And of course, yeah, some people mentioned some books. When
Yep.
affirmative action was white, and of course, waking up white is a big one. I mean, there's so many right out there right now. I mean, none of us can say we don't know. And how do we educate ourselves? Because it's the materials out there now. I see that somebody has their hand up.
Yes. So we are going to Beulah, we're gonna get your mic turned on. You might get a little prompt. There we go.
I just wanted to can you hear me?
Yes.
In regards to this reading of this book, I said, oh man, this is happening now. Here in Tennessee, we have a small town called Mason, Tennessee. And it was a home of a detention center which closed down last year. So the state is now trying to come in, is predominantly Black. So the state is trying to come in now and take the city over and make them give up their charter because this area has been slated for one of the electric factories for cars. So now before the African Americans moved in and took office and are in the leadership roles of the city, and they have worked through and got this electric company that's going to come here. The city has now, after 20 years of mismanagement by white people who were in leadership roles, they are now coming in after the African Americans have come in and have taken leadership as the mayor, the county mayor, the alderman, and all that. They now want to come in and call into question all the bills and things that have been piled up, and bringing up all the atrocities that the individuals that were in leadership, that they want to come in and take over the city now. because this electric company is coming in. And so they're trying to get the mayor to give up the city charter, and that they won't let them have the charter. So they can't move, so the state can come in and put them in receivership, but they will not tell them how long they will be in receivership. And so now the NAACP has gotten involved, and because they will not give them, they just come in and say that we're taking over, but they won't give them an opportunity to figure out a plan to how can we get out of receivership. So these are some of the things that have been happening. I mean, here we are in the 21st century, and we still have this craziness going on. I said it brings me back to whenever the individuals after Reconstruction, and there were a lot of African Americans that were in political positions,
Yep.
and they lost their positions whenever they started having the birth of the Ku Klux Klan in Pulaski, Tennessee. That all these kinds of things started to happening that caused them to lose their positions down in further south, like in Louisiana and places like that. So it's not gone away. It's still here.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, you're seeing it in Mason, Tennessee, as Blacks and African Americans rise to power. Boom, the white power structure comes in to try to revoke that. We see it in Georgia, after a sweep at the federal level, boom, instantly voter suppression.
Well, I was in Georgia whenever Stacey Abrams we went to church on Sunday. And when we came back from church on that Sunday, I was down in rural Georgia, down in Hinesville, Brunswick, that area, Liberty County, Long County, and went to church that morning, came back that afternoon, and some 50,000 or more people had been removed from the rolls. And then so they did this the Sunday before the election on Tuesday. And so they did not have an opportunity to work through getting those people put back on the rolls. And so, and that's this is a case of they had the Fox Garden hen house because the attorney general, but the Kent was the person that had oversight over the elections.
Yep. Yeah. I'm gonna turn your mic off because we got one more question, Beulah, but really appreciate that insight, because it also just made me think about how, a lot of people don't realize how much political power African Americans accessed in a lot of southern states as part of Reconstruction. So allowing people to know that history, and then how the white power structure eliminated that history, and then how that's happening all over again. History repeats itself, and it certainly is the case. So thank you for bringing that up. And then one question that we haven't gotten to yet, but kind of want to do so because we're about on an hour now. So Kaz lives in a city that entered a treaty with the Pogagan Band, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Potawatomi, to return some land in the city to the Pogagan Band. So it is a lot, and Kaz says she would like more cities to follow suit, but it can never be enough. How do you recommend to Kaz and maybe others to speak in praise of this progress without seeming to imply that it is enough?
I guess I don't feel completely prepared to answer that because I don't know enough about that situation and that particular one. Maybe someone else could take that question.
Yeah, or just in general terms, like, there is there is an action that takes place, but maybe, okay, well, it's only part of the land, or, how have you maybe grappled with, like, yep, okay, well, here's something, but is it fully, truly a true, you know, like maybe does that help?
Yes, yes. Well, I can speak to the case of Wilmington and 1898, and finally they started in for the centennial in 1998. There was some acknowledgement, and there was a whole um, commemoration process and workshops done around the truth about what had happened in 1898 with the massacre and the coup d'etat. A few years later, a memorial was built. Some money was donated to some community projects. But it's become so clear that it isn't enough. And that is, what we're working on in coming to the table in Wilmington. And actually, I just realized on the call, we've got one of the facilitators of that group in Wilmington, Kim Cook. But yeah, it's like, hard cold cash is due, not just to the descendants of the people who were run out of town and the people who were killed, but also, to just all of the African Americans in that town. And just there's been so much inequity that has just continued over the whole century. I mean, it's just, I mean, the fact that the percentage of African Americans in that town is still so very low, and that, their wealth as a whole is minimal. I mean, there isn't still to this day a grocery store. There's these wide food deserts in parts of town where the African American communities are. Just things like that. I mean, there's so much more that needs to be done, and no one, I think, can sit back and say, "Well, we did all we could."
Mm, mm. Thank you for that. And I'll just so you all know, I'm just catching up to everything. So many people have been putting amazing resources in the chat, so there will be a lot coming in that follow-up email. Really enjoyed the dialogue between Shannon and Robin, so thank you so much for that. So really encourage you to take a look at that. Appreciate you all communicating there in the chat. And oh gosh, I had my last final question and it's escaped my mind here. Da, 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 da. I guess, Lucy, I can't think of what I had, but it was good. At least I thought it was going to be good. But my last question for you is, just reading McGee's book and through your personal experiences, just give us one challenge, one step that we can take, in this next week or in these next couple of days, as we process everything we've read and everything we've heard. Give us a challenge.
Okay, I would challenge you to check out Coming to the Table, and to think about and just to look at the website and all the resources that are there, and to join it. I mean, it's free to join. And to consider coming to the monthly national Zoom meetings for that, because part of what happens is just a deep exploration of, I mean, we just get down to the nitty gritty of like, what, when did you first even become aware of race? Things like that. The breakout sessions are really, they can go really, really deep. And I mean, as I saw that happen in this group as well. And it's just so very focused on that healing, that healing aspect of coming to the table and really talking about it. So I think that's the big challenge also, of thinking of ways that you might want to make personal reparations, because there's so much and you don't have to be wealthy to do it, making sure you use African-American businesses, that you buy your books from booksellers that are, just not Amazon, not anything but Amazon. Okay, come on, our independent booksellers. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tongue-tied and maybe a little tired. But yeah, the personal reparations thing, I think, is something everybody can do, and you don't have to have had someone in your family line who did something horrific like mine did, because we have all benefited from the atrocities in this country. We've all, yeah.
Appreciate that. And Cass, could you put into the chat a link to Coming to the Table's website there? And then also, Lucy, if you could repost the link to the endowment fund, so folks can check that out. And as you are doing that, Robin has her hand raised, and so we are going to ask you to turn your mic on.
I just wanted to say to Lucy's most recent comment, and just want to preface that this is said with the utmost respect. I appreciate your perspective and you sharing your story, but I respectfully disagree that shopping at Black businesses is a form of reparations. You are supporting a business and you're receiving a good or service for your money. Reparations should be about giving people recompense from unpaid work that has already happened. There should be no exchange of goods, no expectation of something on the person receiving that. I mean, if the government decides that the way that they're going to do it is like a tax break or scholarship fund or something like that, I completely understand, because there's so much pushback against the idea of reparations. I honestly think that that's the only way it's going to happen. I think most American citizens are not going to even agree to having their tax dollars support reparations unless, they have some say in how that money is used. But I don't personally think that supporting a business, I think that is very important. I think that, people who have historically been privileged in this country should make an effort to support business owners who are trying to support businesses from marginalized groups. But again, you are receiving a good or service directly in exchange for your money. You're receiving a good or service right now. That's to me is not reparations.
One second, Lucy, we're going to turn your mic on.
Thank you. Robin, I appreciate that correction. I really do. And yeah, you're absolutely right. So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, it is, you're right. That's not a form of reparations, not in any shape or form.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Lucy. Shannon, we're gonna, there you go.
Robin, what would you suggest then in terms of an action that we might take individually anytime now?
There we go. Thank you, Shannon.
Well, two things. First of all, I don't personally think it should be my responsibility just because I'm pointing out a distruth, that it should be my responsibility to come up with an alternative, because I think the actual answer is a lot more complicated than that. And again, no disrespect, but I think this is kind of the trap that we fall into with a lot of things. People from marginalized groups point out ways, one, they point out ways that they are harmed, and two, they point out ways that the current system is failing them. And as an immediate response, people in power will respond with, well, what would you suggest instead? And it's like, we definitely want to be able to have a seat at the table, to be able to provide that input. But at the same time, there are people who are put in positions of power. They are receiving social power, they're receiving economic power, they're receiving payment for coming up with plans and ideas. People in government are paid money to do this kind of work. People in education systems are paid money to do this kind of work. And the onus is always put back on marginalized groups to say, well, what would you do? This is actual work. This is social work that people in marginalized groups are not being paid for, but expected to do. And it's like, yes, we want to have a seat at the table. Make it an official seat. Make it a paid seat. Make it, we want to understand what it takes to do reparations. Hire Black academics who are studying these types of things. Hire Black academics who are studying things like city planning, who are studying things like, cultural biases and impacts in education. Hire people that are doing this work and pay them for it. Even though, again, we're receiving a service for work, that's not reparations, but it's making sure that people who are given that seat at the table are compensated for the work that they are doing. That's got to be something else that we're thinking about when we have these conversations, because we're expecting people of marginalized groups to do the work without actually providing them, means to do it. And then on top of that, they're providing their input, they're providing both their emotional labor and their academic labor. And then they're not allowed to be the ones that actually push the button. They're not the ones that actually are implementing that, because they're not in those positions to make those final decisions. I think that that's an important thing that we need to first recognize that we're doing, because I don't think anyone means harm when they ask that. I 100% in my heart believe that you're asking that question because you want to make sure that people have their voices heard. But this is the flip side to it, right? We have to make sure that these people who are giving their work are compensated for it. And I see that someone else wants to speak, so I do have some ideas and thoughts around it, but I'm going to relinquish the table because I've spoken for a long time.
Thank you so much, Robin. Appreciate you raising your voice. Thank you. And thank you all for listening as well. Colleen?
Yes, hi. Just want to make 2 points in relation to reparations. And as I put in the chat, that racial inequity was implemented by law by the US government, a series of laws going back to the 1700s, when only white men, rich white men, were allowed to be citizens. And going way forward since then, there were a series of laws, including things like the GI Bill, the Social Security Bill, that were intentionally given to white people and denied to people of color. And so reparations have to be implemented by the federal government. Anything else is maybe racial equity, a means of trying to do good, but reparations need to come from the federal government. And for those who are interested in ideas about how reparations can be implemented, you can read a book called From Here to Equality by William Sandy Darity, D-A-R-I-T-Y, from the University of North Carolina. He and his wife wrote this book. It gives great ideas on how the federal government can implement reparations. I recommend it highly.
Colleen, can you put the name of the book
Sure.
in chat? Or if you have a link, that would be great. If not, no worries. I can find the link here as well. So yeah. Really appreciate that. And just one thing that I'm thinking of is, I am part of my school's inclusion diversity committee. And, and I think that one thing I would love for us, our committee that's kind of been told by the district that we need to right now. And but I think one thing that I personally can do is what's the history of our school district? What's the history of my community? And learning that and seeing what we can do at the local level as a government and as an institution to right the sins that we may have. So thank you.
Welcome.
And also, Robin, I know you said you had some other ideas, and so if you would like to put those in the chat, or thank you, Colleen, for putting that in. I'm gonna get us a link here, because if I do it right now, then I have it in the chat, and then I can get that forward to everyone, because I know there's been a lot shared here this evening. I'm trying to find a link that is not Amazon because I personally do not shop with them. So I'm finding a Goodreads link because that's all I can find right at the moment. It looks like Wendy Darity is an excellent writer and echoes Colleen. So thank you for that. Boom, there's a lot there. So awesome. Oh, I did not know Goodreads is owned by Amazon. So thank you. It never stops. All right. We got like 15 minutes left, and there has been a phenomenal conversation here tonight. Robin, I see your hand raised, so we're gonna get your mic turned on.
Just wanted to say, instead of Goodreads, I'm gonna try to get a link and drop it in the chat as well. But there's another company that operates similarly to Goodreads. They don't have as large of a user base as of yet, but it was created by a Black woman, and it's maintained and owned by a Black woman. It's called Storygraph, and it's a similar thing where you can look up books and get a synopsis, get a picture, get the same type of information. Admittedly, Goodreads is, like I said, a bigger user base, so they'll have like more input and things like that. But the way to help things grow is by using them, right? So I'll drop a link for that in the chat.